Snow drifted across the long road like pale ash from a dying world, each flake settling on the abandoned carriage tracks that wound toward the Duke of Ravenshire's estate. The sky hung low and mournful, a winter ceiling heavy with unshed storms, and the lone carriage that approached seemed too fragile a creature to belong in such an unforgiving expanse. Inside it sat the woman society had already renamed, the enemy's bride. It was not a title she had chosen, nor earned, but it clung to her like ice to a window pane, sharp enough to wound, cold enough to silence protest. Her breath came in small clouds as she watched the estate rise from the snow, a stone fortress wrapped in silver frost, its chimneys trailing thin threads of smoke that curled upward as if hesitant to touch the sky. The horses slowed, her gloved hands, thin gloves, poorly suited to the bitter wind of this northern county, tightened at her lap as the carriage jolted to a final stop. She felt the sound of the wheels freeze into the stillness. Someone outside shouted orders. Boots crunched. A gust of winter air sliced through the door the moment it opened, and she stepped into a world that did not want her. The courtyard was lined with stone, polished by seasons of ice and footsteps of men who served the Duke with unflinching loyalty. Their eyes moved to her with the curiosity reserved for an omen. A footman offered his hand. She hesitated before accepting, though she knew refusal would only deepen the humiliation waiting inside. Her gown, once elegant, was now travel-worn, its skirts bearing salt stains and creases from too many miles of restless motion. As she crossed the courtyard toward the grand entrance, she heard the whispers. Quiet, cutting, familiar. So she came after all. The punishment is complete, then. Does the Duke know she arrives today? He knows everything. Each sentence tightened something inside her chest. Her father's decision still rang in her ears. The cold decree that she would be sent to Ravenshire in place of the hostile bride that fate, or politics, had once promised. She carried another's vows and another's price, and the winter shadows of Ravenshire seemed determined to remind her of that with every breath. Inside, the manor's entrance hall stretched before her like a cathedral of frost. Tall windows framed the world in white, their panes trembling with the trembling wind. Servants stood in ordered lines along the walls, their dark uniforms blending with the carved oak panels. A maid, no older than 20, dipped a shallow curtsy before stepping forward. "You are expected, madam," she said, though the tone carried the stiffness of duty, not welcome. The words stung. She swallowed the ache rising in her throat. Expected but not wanted. Prepared for, but not chosen. She followed the maid across the polished floor, aware of the soft echoes of her own hesitant steps. The hall opened into a warm chamber lit by a wide hearth where flames curled like living things. She paused at the edge of the threshold as a tall figure emerged from the far side of the room, his silhouette marked by the fire's quiet glow. He wore a dark frock coat, its lines precise, his posture straight and controlled as if carved from the same stone as the pillars that held up his ancestral home. The Duke of Ravenshire. His presence filled the room before his voice ever did. He paused near the fire, hands clasped behind his back, his gaze following her with a scrutiny that made her heart quiver. He did not bow. He did not offer greeting. Instead, he spoke with the cool restraint of a man accustomed to being feared. "You arrived sooner than I was told." His voice was deep, steady, neither harsh nor welcoming, merely assessing. She lowered her gaze, feeling the weight of 1,000 judgments that had walked ahead of her. "My father insisted on an early departure," she replied softly. "I see." His eyes, gray as winter steel, held her for a long moment. "Your father seldom acts without motive." The observation struck her like a small blow. She stiffened slightly, hands trembling where she folded them together. "His motives are his own," she murmured. "I am merely the one sent." The Duke did not respond at once. He studied her, noting the travel-worn gown, the reddened fingertips, the thin shoes ill-suited for such merciless cold. She sensed none of the cruelty she had prepared herself for, and yet the absence of warmth felt almost more unnerving. He moved closer, though not enough to breach propriety, his voice lowering. "You understand why you were sent here." She hesitated. "I understand what they have said." "And what do you believe?" She had not expected the question. It lodged in her throat, fragile, difficult. She lifted her chin a fraction, enough to show she had not been entirely broken by the winter roads or by the punishment that had cast her into the Duke's hands. "I believe," she whispered, "that I was sent here to be an inconvenience." A flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, crossed his features, a subtle shift quickly hidden. "And what do you fear?" She swallowed. Her breath fogged in the space between them. "That I was sent here to be despised." Silence stretched like a blade, thin and shimmering between them. The fire crackled behind him, the only sound in a room that felt carved out of watching eyes and unspoken histories. At last he stepped back. "We shall speak later," he said. "For now, you will be taken to your room. My staff has prepared accommodations, though I suspect they are not what was intended for you." The words were strange, almost protective, though delivered with a calm that revealed nothing more. The maid returned and motioned for her to follow. As she turned away, she felt the Duke's gaze linger on her, steady and unreadable, as though he were weighing something she could not see. The journey up the grand staircase felt endless. Her footsteps echoed along cold stone walls lined with portraits of stern ancestors who stared down with painted disapproval. The winter light filtering through frosted windows cast pale shadows across her gown, making her feel ghost-like in a place filled with too much history and too little mercy. When the maid opened the door to her room, a wave of warm air enveloped her. A fire burned gently in the hearth. A tray of steaming broth sat near the window. A thick wool cloak lay folded across the bed, far finer than anything she had worn since leaving her father's estate. She blinked, unsure. "The Duke ordered these placed here this morning," the maid said, avoiding her eyes. The revelation sent a shiver through her, not from cold, but from something more dangerous. Something like confusion, something like hope. Outside, winter winds pressed against the glass, painting the world white. She approached the window, resting her fingertips against the cold pane. Below, in the courtyard, the Duke stood alone, hands behind his back, watching the snow fall in absolute stillness. He was not looking at her, yet she felt the strange certainty that he knew precisely where she stood. A punishment had brought her here. Shame had shaped her journey. But nothing in his manner matched the cruelty she had feared. And that, more than any insult, any cold greeting, terrified her. For kindness could be a battlefield too. And as a fresh gust of snow swept across the courtyard, she understood with sudden, breath-stealing clarity that whatever awaited her in Ravenshire, it would not resemble the fate she had been warned of. It would be something far more complicated, something already unfolding, something she was not prepared for. Snow drifted deeper across Ravenshire with each passing day, quieting the world until the manor seemed suspended inside a breath the season refused to release. She moved through its vast corridors carefully, her steps light yet echoing, as though she feared disturbing a silence that did not belong to her. Every servant she passed carried a similar expression, polite, guarded, aware. Their glances slid over her with the weight of a story already told before she ever arrived. And though none spoke cruelly to her face, she felt the presence of whispers the way one feels a draft. Sharp, whisper thin, undeniably real. Yet even in the coldness, she noticed quiet interventions. Embers glowing in her fireplace before dawn, her meals warmed exactly when hunger quickened, her cloak brushed free of travel dust she had been too weary to remove. None of these gestures bore the Duke's name, but she sensed his hand in them all, steady and deliberate. She saw him only in passing, a silhouette at the bend of the staircase, the faint scent of winter pine trailing after him when he returned from the outer grounds, or the low, controlled tones of his conversations with the steward. Every appearance unsettled her. He said nothing directly to her, yet his attention pressed against the air whenever she crossed his path. It was not hostility. It was not curiosity. It was something quieter, something contained by discipline and pride. It felt as though he watched her not to judge her, but to judge the intentions of those who had sent her here under the guise of punishment. In those brief flickers of proximity, she sensed a tension beneath his composed exterior, a conflict held back with the same restraint he applied to every breath. Rumors threaded through the manor like cold fingers probing beneath doors. She heard them in concealed corners, between hurried steps, in the silence that fell too quickly when she approached. They said the Duke had been betrayed once, deeply and irrevocably. They said he held grudges the way winter held frost, unyielding, merciless. They said her arrival was meant to reopen wounds long buried and provoke him into actions that would serve some hidden feud. Each whisper struck sharper than the one before. She questioned whether he resented her presence in ways he refused to voice. She questioned whether he saw her as nothing more than an emblem of the treachery that had shaped his past. And with every passing hour, she wondered how long a man's patience could endure being tested by someone he had not chosen, someone brought into his home as a living reminder of an old enemy. Snow thickened as days passed, softening the edges of the estate. One afternoon, while a quiet storm gathered against the frozen glass, she wandered into the conservatory, a chamber of chilled perfumes where winter light drifted like faint smoke. Frost traced delicate patterns along the windows, each line a fragile testament to the cold. She touched a leaf wilted by frost, feeling an odd kinship with its quiet stoicism. She did not hear the Duke enter. His reflection appeared beside her in the glass, tall, severe, yet softened by the muted glow of snowlight. When he spoke, his voice was low enough to startle her. He inquired whether her room remained warm, the first question he had ever asked that carried the shadow of concern. She managed a quiet yes, though her pulse quickened. The winter garden lay behind the glass, but the real chill sat between them, the uncertainty of his intentions. She answered with a nod, her voice too fragile to trust. He moved closer, though not enough to breach propriety, his gaze drifting toward the frost-stilled garden. He remarked on the worsening storm, how the outer roads might be impassable by nightfall, his tone calm, but touched with something she could not decipher. When she attempted to thank him for the fire, the cloak, the unexpected kindness, he interrupted softly, insisting none of it was charity. The words settled over her with more force than an open rebuke. Charity implied pity. His tone offered something steadier, though he refused to elaborate. A riddle she could neither accept nor reject. That evening, the manor hosted a small gathering of local families, each eager to witness the Duke's response to the unwelcome bride placed in his care. She descended the staircase with careful grace, aware of every eye tilted upward. Whispered judgments rippled across the room. A lady hidden behind a fan mocked her gown. Laughter scattered like broken crystal. Her cheeks burned with the humiliation she refused to let show. When she reached the last step, the Duke approached. His presence parted the crowd before him. He extended his arm, deliberately, unmistakably, before every spectator. Shock rippled through the hall like a sudden chill. She accepted, breath unsteady. His expression remained composed, yet his choice echoed louder than any declaration. Together they crossed the drawing room, drawing glances filled with confusion, discomfort, curiosity. The Duke guided her to a quiet seating area near a tall window, where candlelight softened the icy glow of the snow outside. He asked whether she preferred tea or mulled wine, his voice formal yet tinged with a subtle protectiveness she did not understand. She chose tea. When he placed the delicate porcelain cup in her hands, his fingertips brushed hers, a fleeting contact, yet enough to warm something in her chest long buried beneath dread. Heat from the tea seeped into her palms while uncertainty gathered in her heart. Whispers rose again, sharper this time. A gentleman muttered the Duke must have lost his wits. A lady speculated he intended to shame her publicly before the season concluded. She heard each cruel syllable, though she kept her gaze lowered. The Duke appeared utterly unaffected. He asked whether she found Ravenshire tolerable despite the severe winter. The gentleness in his question startled her. She admitted quietly that she had expected cruelty, not consideration. His gaze held hers with unsettling steadiness. His answer came in a calm murmur. Not all punishments must be cruel. The words lingered like a quiet ember. The remainder of the evening unfolded with the precision of a carefully drawn waltz. The Duke remained near, close enough to silence gossip, yet never overstepping propriety. She observed the subtle weariness shadowing his eyes, the way he braced himself before entering rooms filled with inquisitive gazes, the courteous gestures he extended without expecting gratitude. She realized he carried burdens not linked to her presence, but awakened by it. If she had been sent as a weapon to reopen old wounds, he did not wield her as such. Instead, he shielded her in ways that deepened her confusion. Why? What did he owe her? Nothing. And yet something unspoken bound his actions. Later, when the final guest departed and the manor settled, she stepped into the corridor overlooking the courtyard. Snow fell in flakes, blurring lanterns and dimming stones below. She rested her hands on the railing, the cold seeping through her gloves. She wondered if she had misjudged the Duke, if the man she had been warned about was not the man who had stood beside her. Yet doubt lingered. If he meant to shield her, why keep such distance? If he felt nothing, why offer his arm? As she turned toward the window, movement below caught her eye. The Duke waited near the gate, speaking to a rider who had arrived through the storm. When the rider handed him a sealed letter, he stilled. From afar, she saw the change in him, the way his posture sharpened, the way his gaze lifted toward her window, as though the message carried her name. Snow pressed against the window in trembling sheets that blurred the lantern lights of the courtyard, turning the world beyond her chamber into a shifting haze of white and shadow. She stood very still, her fingertips grazing the frost-rimmed glass as she watched the Duke cross the courtyard below with deliberate, measured steps. The sealed letter he had taken from the rider remained in his hand, untouched by the snowflakes drifting around him. There was something unsettling in the rigidity of his posture. An old wound awakened, a memory he did not welcome. She felt, rather than saw, that the message carried her name, though she could not fathom why. The rider galloped away, swallowed by winter's dim breath, leaving the Duke alone in the storm, his figure striking against the whiteness like ink on a blank page. When he finally turned toward the manor, the heavy door groaned open and closed behind him with a sound that echoed faintly through the walls, reaching her like a warning. She stepped back from the window, her breath catching with the same uncertain rhythm she had carried since her arrival. The room felt smaller tonight, the fire dimmer, its warmth not enough to calm the unease settling into her bones. She tried to occupy herself, rearranging the cloak the Duke had provided, smoothing the crease of her gown, brushing melted snow from the sill, but her thoughts circled back to the letter again and again. The air seemed charged with the weight of something unsaid, something moving quietly beneath the surface of Ravenshire's cold walls. When a knock finally sounded on her door, she froze. The sound was soft, polite, but unmistakably firm. She whispered permission to enter, though her voice trembled against her will. The Duke stepped inside, the letter now open in his hand. His expression carried a composure too carefully crafted to be natural. He dismissed the maid who had accompanied him with a single nod, leaving the door partially closed behind him. The quiet between them was unfamiliar tonight, threaded with tension she could not unravel. He approached her slowly, stopping at a distance that respected propriety yet felt painfully far. For a long moment, he simply studied her, as though searching her face for a truth she did not realize she carried. "This arrived for you," he said, offering the letter without stepping closer. His voice was controlled, almost too even. "From your father." Her breath caught. She had expected cold orders, perhaps news of further punishment, but not a letter addressed to her directly. She took it gingerly, the parchment trembling in her hands. The Duke turned away to grant her privacy, yet she sensed he remained fully attuned to every shift of her breath. She unfolded the letter carefully, reading her father's words as the firelight flickered across the page. The message was brief, cold, commanding, unmistakably cruel. Her father expressed disappointment that the Duke had not yet dismissed her. He implied she should be willing to endure whatever lesson Ravenshire intended to teach. He urged her to be silent, obedient, and invisible so as not to provoke further embarrassment. There was no affection, no concern, only calculation. Her throat tightened. She lowered the letter, fingers curling around its edges to steady herself. "He wishes me to remain here," she managed softly. "Not as a guest." "I gathered as much," the Duke replied, still turned away. She sensed the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands flexed at his sides. When he finally faced her again, his gaze held a sharpness that startled her. "He intends this as a punishment for you, but for me as well." She blinked, unable to mask her confusion. "For you? Your family believes this arrangement will reopen wounds that have not yet healed," he said calmly, though restraint flickered just beneath the surface. "They expect my resentment to fall upon you. They expect you to suffer for his sins." His voice darkened with something unnamed, anger, perhaps, or insult. "But I will not be used as a weapon." The truth struck her with a force she had not prepared for. She had always known she was a pawn, yet hearing it spoken aloud stripped something raw and trembling within her. Her voice quivered. "You owe me nothing. If you choose distance, I would not fault you." "Distance," he repeated quietly, "is not what I intend." His words hung in the air like warmth she did not dare move toward. He stepped closer, the fire casting faint gold along the sharp lines of his coat. His gaze did not waver. "Tell me honestly," he said, "were you complicit in your father's schemes? Did you come here willingly?" The question cut deeper than any accusation, for she heard fear behind it. Fear that she might be a mask hiding another deception meant to unmake him. She lifted her chin, steadying her breath. "I did not come here willingly," she answered, "nor with any intent to harm you. I came because refusing him would have carried consequences far harsher than this cold." Her voice softened, though truth made it tremble. "I had no choice." For a breath, the Duke simply looked at her, and in that gaze she felt a shift, subtle, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakably real. A thaw in the distance he had so carefully maintained. A recognition of shared imprisonment, different chains but the same cage. He exhaled slowly, the first sign that the tension clenching his shoulders had loosened even slightly. Then, he murmured, "Perhaps we begin with truth." She lowered her eyes, feeling exposed yet oddly relieved. "Truth is all I have left." He took one more step, nearer now than he had ever stood, though propriety still maintained its delicate thread. His voice deepened. "There are matters you do not yet know, matters concerning your father, and the role he expects you to play. Until I understand the full extent of it, you must trust me." Her pulse quickened at the request. Trust him? A man she feared, respected, admired, and did not yet understand? And yet the quiet behind his words carried no threat, only a somber honesty that felt rarer than warmth in winter. "I will try," she whispered. "Trying is enough," he replied. The fire flickered between them, its glow shifting across his face, softening the harshness in his expression. For a moment, the world outside seemed to still, the storm, the cold, the burden of punishment, and the only thing that existed was the fragile thread of understanding forming between them. A connection not chosen, not sought, yet undeniably real. He turned away first, as though ending the moment before it carried them too far. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we will discuss what your father intends. Tonight, you should rest." She nodded, though her heart raced with the sudden swirl of uncertainty and quiet hope he left behind. As he reached the door, he paused, the faintest hesitation in his posture. When he turned back to her, his expression had changed, no longer composed, no longer shielded, but shadowed with the weight of the news he had not yet spoken. "There is one more thing in the letter," he said softly. "Something you have not seen." He held her gaze, the air tightening between them like a hell breath. "It concerns your future here." Then he closed the door, leaving her alone with the fire's dimming glow and the echo of a truth she had not yet learned. Snow had stopped falling by morning, leaving Ravenshire wrapped in a deceptive calm that felt more dangerous than the storm itself. The world outside, lay frozen in pale stillness, every hedge and stone outlined in white, as though the estate had been preserved inside glass. She rose before the servants stirred, unable to rest beneath the weight of the Duke's unfinished words. "Something you have not seen." The phrase followed her through the quiet corridors as she moved toward the breakfast room, its echo sharper than the cold. Each step carried the awareness that her presence here was no longer merely a punishment endured, but a question suspended between two wills, her father's and the Duke's, and she did not yet know which would prevail. The Duke joined her at the long table without ceremony, his expression composed but distant, as though he had not slept. A thin layer of frost clung to the window panes behind him, catching the early light. He dismissed the servants quickly, ensuring privacy before speaking. In his hand lay the letter, now folded with careful precision. He did not offer it to her again. Instead, he placed it upon the table between them, like an object neither of them wished to touch. "Your father has made his intentions clear," he said quietly. "He expects me to send you away once the lesson is complete." Her fingers tightened around her teacup. "And what does he consider complete?" The Duke's mouth curved faintly, though there was no humor in it. "Public humiliation, withdrawal of protection, silence." He met her gaze. "He assumes I will grow tired of the inconvenience and return you to him diminished." A familiar ache bloomed in her chest, yet she lifted her chin. "Then I am to be broken for his satisfaction." "Yes," the Duke replied evenly. "And for mine, according to him." The words struck harder than she expected. She set the cup down before her trembling became visible. "You told me you would not be used as a weapon," she said softly. "Does that remain true?" "It does," he answered without hesitation. "But defying him openly carries its own consequences." She studied his face, searching for any hint of calculation. Instead, she found restraint, carefully practiced, hard-earned. "You owe me no defiance," she said. "If sending me away restores your peace, I will accept it." His gaze sharpened. "Peace is not restored by surrender," he said, "nor by allowing others to dictate who may stand beneath my roof." The statement settled between them, heavy with meaning. She sensed that this was not solely about her. There was something older at play, something bound to pride and wounds inflicted long before her arrival. The Duke reached for the letter again, unfolding it slowly. "There is an additional demand," he continued. "One your father did not trust to speak aloud." Her breath stilled. "What is it?" "He wishes you to remain here through the remainder of the season," the Duke said, "under the pretense of reconciliation. Long enough for rumor to take root. Long enough for your reputation and mine to suffer." He paused. "He expects scandal." The word lingered like smoke. She felt suddenly exposed, as though the walls themselves leaned closer to hear. "Then my presence is meant to provoke whispers," she said, "to stain you by association." "Yes." A silence followed, broken only by the soft crackle of the hearth. She felt the weight of choice pressing in from every side. To remain meant becoming the very spectacle her father intended. To leave meant confirming his power over her fate. She realized then that the Duke's calm hid the same conflict. He, too, stood at the edge of a decision that would define him in the eyes of a society already eager to judge. "What will you do?" she asked. The Duke rose and crossed to the window, hands clasped behind his back. He watched the frozen grounds for a long moment before answering. "I will not parade you before society as an object of ridicule," he said. "Nor will I send you away like a failure I have grown tired of." He turned back to her, his gaze resolute. "If you remain, it will be by my terms." "And what are those?" she whispered. "Dignity," he replied. "Yours above all." He moved closer, stopping at the edge of propriety. "You will attend gatherings only when you choose. You will be addressed with respect, and you will not be used to satisfy your father's cruelty." Her heart quickened. Society will not accept such restraint. "Society is rarely consulted when I decide whom I will protect," he said. The word protect settled over her like unexpected warmth. She had not known how deeply she longed to hear it until it was spoken. Yet fear lingered. "Protection invites scrutiny," she said. "They will question your motives." "They already do," he answered calmly. She studied him then, not as the Duke of Ravenshire, but as a man standing between duty and defiance. "And if they decide I am worth less than their approval?" she asked. "Then," he said quietly, "they will learn how little their approval matters to me." The air seemed to shift with the declaration. She felt a stirring she dared not name. Hope, perhaps, or the first fragile hint of trust. Yet even as warmth bloomed, she sensed a shadow gathering behind it. Choices carried costs, and the Duke's resolve would not go unchallenged. A servant's knock echoed faintly from the corridor, announcing the arrival of guests unexpectedly early. The Duke stiffened, recognizing the timing for what it was, a calculated intrusion. He turned back to her, his voice low. "Your father moves quickly," he said, "and he is not alone." She rose beside him, her spine straight despite the tremor in her chest. "Then let them come," she said softly. "I will not hide." For the first time, something like approval flickered in his eyes. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect rarely offered. "Nor will I allow you to stand alone," he replied. As the door opened and footsteps approached, she felt the full weight of what lay ahead. Scrutiny sharpened by malice, whispers waiting to strike. Yet beneath it all was the knowledge that a line had been drawn, quietly but irrevocably. Whatever society demanded, whatever her father intended, Ravenshire would not surrender her easily. And as she stepped forward to face the gathering storm, she realized that the greatest danger no longer lay in disgrace, but in how fiercely she hoped the Duke would keep his word. The drawing room filled with voices sharp as cut glass, each arrival carrying the chill of expectation. She stood beside the Duke as society gathered, aware of how deliberately he placed himself, not before her, not behind her, but at her side. It was a choice visible to everyone. Murmurs rippled through the room, measured at first, then emboldened by disbelief. Faces turned toward her with curiosity sharpened into judgment, yet she did not lower her gaze. Something in her had shifted since the morning. She no longer felt like a parcel awaiting return. She felt, instead, like a question no one wished to answer aloud. The Duke greeted his guests with restrained civility, his voice even, his manner impeccable. Yet beneath the courtesy lay steel. When inquiries inevitably turned toward her, thinly veiled, wrapped in politeness, he answered before she could. He named her as under his protection, as a guest of Ravenshire whose presence required no justification. Each word landed with quiet authority. A lady protested gently, suggesting discretion, suggesting appearances. The Duke listened, then replied with a calm that silenced the room. Appearances, he said, had never been his master. She felt the weight of every gaze shift, not toward her now, but toward him. Some faces hardened, others betrayed shock. Her father's allies, subtle yet unmistakable, watched with narrowed eyes. They had expected discomfort, perhaps dismissal. They had not expected defiance. The tension grew until it could no longer remain unspoken. A gentleman of influence stepped forward, voice smooth, calculating. He suggested that Ravenshire had been placed in an impossible position, that releasing her would restore balance, spare reputations. The implication hung heavy. Send her away. The room waited. The Duke did not answer at once. He looked at her instead, not with inquiry, but with certainty, as though the choice had already been made long before this moment demanded it. When he finally spoke, his voice carried clearly, measured and unwavering. He said she would not be sent away. He said no man had the right to decide her worth. He said if scandal followed, it would follow him, and he would bear it. A breath seemed to leave the room all at once. The declaration was not loud, not dramatic, yet its force was unmistakable. She felt it like a hand at her back, steadying her. For the first time since arriving at Ravenshire, she believed she might not be broken by this place. The gathering soon fractured, guests departing under the weight of what they had witnessed. Some offered stiff courtesies. Others avoided her entirely. When the last carriage rolled away and silence reclaimed the halls, she felt the exhaustion settle into her bones. She moved toward the window, watching dusk gather over snowbound grounds. Behind her, the Duke remained still, his presence a quiet anchor. "You did not need to do that," she said softly. "I did," he replied, "because allowing them to decide would have been a betrayal." "Of me?" she asked. "Of myself," he answered. The honesty of it left her momentarily breathless. She turned to face him, seeing not the Duke of Ravenshire, but a man who had chosen a harder path because it aligned with his conscience. "My father will not forgive this," she said. "I'm not seeking his forgiveness. And if he escalates—" Her voice faltered despite her resolve. "If he ensures I become the scandal he promised?" The Duke's expression softened, though resolve remained. "Then we will endure it," he said. "Together, if you choose to remain." The word choose resonated deeply. She had not been given that luxury in a long while. She walked closer, close enough now to see the weariness etched around his eyes, the cost of his defiance already written there. "If I stay," she said, "it will be because I will not be used again. Not by him, not by anyone. Nor will I allow you to be," he replied. Silence settled, not heavy this time, but intimate. The fire crackled softly, casting shifting light across the room. She realized then that what bound them was not romance born of fantasy, but something steadier, mutual recognition, shared resistance against cruelty disguised as order. A servant entered quietly, bearing a final letter that had arrived late. The Duke accepted it, reading swiftly. His jaw tightened. He folded it once, then looked at her with a gravity that set her pulse racing. "Your father intends to make his move public," he said. "He will accuse me of harboring his daughter against his will." Her breath caught. "Then everything you have done will be questioned," he finished. "Yes." She stepped closer, her voice firm despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Then say the word," she said. "I will leave before dawn." The Duke did not respond immediately. He looked at her as though weighing not risk but truth. When he spoke, his voice was low, resolute. "No," he said. "Running would give him victory. I will not allow that." "What will you do?" she asked. "I will claim responsibility," he said, "for your presence, for my choice." The implication struck her with quiet force. Claiming responsibility meant more than protection. It meant reputation. It meant sacrifice. "You would bind yourself to this scandal," she whispered. "I would bind myself to what is right." Her heart raced, torn between gratitude and fear. Outside, wind rose again, stirring snow from the rooftops. Winter pressed closer, relentless. Yet within the room, something unyielding took shape. She reached for his hand, not as a plea, but as an acknowledgement. He did not pull away. His grip was steady, warm, certain. In that moment, she understood that whatever awaited them, society's judgment, her father's wrath, the cost of standing firm, they would face it not as captor and captive, nor as punishment and penance, but as two souls who had chosen defiance over despair. And as the fire burned low and night sealed Ravenshire in white silence, she realized the greatest transformation had already begun, not in how the world saw her, but in how fiercely she had decided to stand.